Mackenzie Johnston with Tri-State Livestock News, bringing you discussions concerning fair cattle markets. Today we have the opportunity to chat with Shelly Ziesch from Pettibone, North Dakota. She farms and ranches with her husband, and she is also a state director on the North Dakota Farmers Union Board, where she represents 9 counties. Can you just tell me a little bit about your background and your involvement within the cattle industry?
Okay, yeah, I'm Shelly Ziesch, and my husband Robin and I farm and ranch north of Pettibone. We've been doing that since '91 together, and then before that, I'm a fourth-generation cattle rancher. So I've been born and raised into the cattle business, as most everybody knows what that all entails. Is you hit the ground running from a young age, and I've just always loved working with cattle and stuff. We're a diversified operation, so we also raise corn, wheat, oats, beans, and alfalfa.
What do you feel are the major issues standing in the way of fair cattle markets today?
Right now, I think it's a lack of competition in the processing end of it. We're down to 4 big companies, and they control almost 85% of the cattle slaughter in the U.S. So I think that's a huge hindrance to having fair markets. What
solutions could we implement to solve that issue?
I think we need to have more local and regionalized processing, and some of that maybe need to be incentivized. And then also, like the 50-14 rule, which requires the packers to purchase 50% of the cattle from the cash market, I think that would help with the marketing too.
Earlier this spring, President Trump made the statement that he would like to terminate all trade deals where we import cattle. What are your thoughts on beef and cattle imports?
Well, I think we import an awful lot of cattle and boxed beef for the number of cattle we raise in the U.S. I just looked at some numbers this morning, and it looks like we're importing 1.2 million metric tons just in 2019 alone, and we're at 1.2 million metric tons already year to date. So yeah, our imports are going up, and I really think that hurts our domestic cattle market.
What are your thoughts on the DOJ investigation into our 4 big beef packers?
I think it's about time that somebody looks into what's going on. And of those 4 large processors, they're multinational companies for the most part, so they're looking out for their number one, and we need to start looking out for our number one, which is U.S. cattle ranchers. And I think it's great that they're finally looking into what we've been talking about for a long time.
What are your thoughts on USDA's push to implement RFID tags across the industry?
I can see the rationale for it, for the disease tracking and that type of thing. I guess personally, and I'm talking as myself as a cattle producer, I worry about where the data goes to. As personally, I don't have a problem with having the RFID tags in for the disease tracking component of it, but I don't want that information out there on exactly how many head we've got out here, at what age they're at, and that type of thing to be used against us in marketing. I mean, you see it in other industries. We used to raise malting barley. The only way you could get a contract is if you had acres to start with, and then you had to guarantee so many bushels. So they've got a lock on the market on exactly what's out there. So I'm concerned that this would wind up being something similar to that, where if they know exactly how many head are out there, where they're at in their life cycle, whether they're ready to be processed, if they're breeding age or whatever, and they'll know exactly all that data. I just get concerned about the confidentiality of it and making sure that it only is in certain hands and it doesn't get out there to work against us in the long run.
What are your thoughts on mandatory country of origin labeling?
I'm for it. I was for it when we pushed the first time, and then we got it, and we saw record cattle prices. And I said we've been educating people for years on the value of buying local and buying U.S. products and supporting our own. And then when we got the mandatory, I mean, it was great. The things were looking up in the rural country, and young people were coming back to farms and ranches. And then when we lost it, we saw pretty much a free fall of markets. And then they came up with the voluntary label, and then they said, that this was going to be an excellent solution. Well, we've had the voluntary label for almost 5 years now, and they've basically made a mockery of it by just being able to relabel things and being able to call it product of U.S. So I think that's detrimental to not only the producers, but also the consumers who are relying on that label that we've educated them on to be what it says it is. And now that it's doesn't have to be product of U.S. to have the product of U.S. label for beef and pork, and I think that's huge for our industry.
There's currently a petition circulating to bring about a beef checkoff referendum. What are your thoughts on the beef checkoff program?
I think it can be used for good, and I think it originally was that. I'm not sure it's at that place anymore of beef promotion and that type of thing. When we saw, NCBA and other organizations working against us on the mandatory cool, that was real disheartening. And that's where our checkoff goes to. So I guess I'd like to see that maybe taken into hand a little bit more, where they're a little more, I don't want to say regulated, but a little more responsible for where the money is spent. It's really hard to track. If you try to look in to see where the checkoff dollars are going, it's really hard to see where your money goes. And if they're using your money to fight against something you really want, that's really hard pill to swallow.
During the pandemic, we saw some incredible price gouging at the meat counter for consumers. Do you think this gouging could have caused some permanent damage to beef demand?
I don't think so. I mean, I think it's maybe hurt a little bit, but everybody rushed to go buy beef. And it's just unfortunate that the processors couldn't keep the supply there for people. But I couldn't believe that they price gouged it, that they did during a pandemic. I mean, that was just awful. We'd seen it already with the fire in Kansas, the processing plant. And it's hard to take when we know that what we're getting paid and what they're getting paid. And somebody had asked, I can't even think of his name, I apologize. But he said that, the processors have to be allowed to make money, and eventually they'll give it down to us. At some point, we got to let them make this big money, and this was after the Kansas fire. And it's like, well, we're still waiting. We're going to wait for, when is it going to be, 20, 30 years from now we'll get paid? It was an awful excuse for a terrible deal, but I can't believe the price gouging that went on, and hopefully people still go out and eat beef.
Since the pandemic hit, there has been a push for fake meat products. From Beyond Meat to Impossible Burgers, we have seen those companies basically push their product even more than we've ever seen. Do you feel that fake meat products are a threat to the beef industry?
Yes, they are, in the sense of the transparency of labeling and what they're promoting and what the advertising part of it, that it's cleaner and better for the environment and that type of thing. I still think cattle are some of the best harvesters out there in the world. They're taking grass and they're taking grains and they're taking other products that maybe otherwise wouldn't be utilized. They're grazing on land that couldn't otherwise be utilized for farm ground, and they're converting it into a great protein source. And to have these other companies come out and try to deceive the consumers by saying that we're harming the environment and other things, I think that's where we need to keep them in line on that, just being truthful that we aren't harming the environment. Because, I guess if people want to try it or eat it, that's up to them. I'm not going to be one that's saying, hey, you can't eat that, but don't be able to call it beef or meat or pork or whatever product they're trying to push at the time, making sure it's real clear that it is not a meat and it's not beef, and to not be able to package it the same.
What do you see happening to the independent cattle producer if substantial changes aren't made to achieve fair cattle markets?
We're eventually going to die out. We've got a lot of people that are aging out right now. They don't have somebody coming in to take over their operations. The younger people don't want to come back because right now it doesn't look like there's a lot of hope out there to be able to make a living at it. I don't know that any of us go into this business looking to get rich. It's more of a calling of taking care of creatures and making an end product with them and being resourceful. But in the long run, we still have to make a living, however that may look to each individual operation. But right now, we're not seeing any young people coming back. It's a real tough go of it. And if you don't already have a pretty good in somewhere, they're not coming back. Even if they have the in, that they see the workload and go, no, we aren't interested in working that hard and not getting paid, or worse, losing money over the deal. So we're eventually going to keep getting smaller as independent ones, and then who knows what'll happen as bigs keep getting bigger. It's not a good situation. I guess we've seen it already in the processing, that bigger isn't always better. That when you get rid of the competition, that's when you get to put the price where you want it, and consumers can either take it or leave it. And you tell them what they want, not the other way around.
Do you feel our industry could go down the path of vertical integration?
Yep. And I'm not so sure some days that isn't what their hidden agenda kind of is on some of this stuff. Yeah, and that's something we'd absolutely like to avoid as much as possible, especially with the pandemic, when you saw the processing plants go down and then just terminating hogs and chickens and stuff on a large scale because they didn't have any place to go with them, and the next batch was coming up. To see that in the beef industry would just be awful. I can't even imagine what that would look like, but we need to avoid vertical integration in the beef industry as much as possible.
If you could sum it up into one sentence, what does the cattle industry need most right now?
Right now, the beef industry needs competition in processing. We need fair markets. We need to be able to market our cattle